All right, hello. Welcome to the final reading of Switch MOTOWN, DeBarge and Me by Greg Williams. We're going to be reading chapter 16 and 17. And then, if I have time, I will go through this book. I'll make a separate video for all the pictures. Yeah, that won't take long at all. All right. Title of chapter 16 is Switch 5, but it has the Roman letter V, and Roman numerals V is 5. And it's a picture of the album cover. After a few weeks of shaking off the road weariness and getting my life back in full swing, it was time to gear up for the next Switch album. Preparing to record the new Switch 5 for Motown was bittersweet because my problems with Bobby and vice versa were finally over. But I had a big void to try and fill. Switch was free to replace him as we saw fit. I knew before I made the move that replacing his sound, would almost be as big a detriment as it was dealing with the person he had become over the past few years. But we had to try. After putting out the call, meeting, and auditioning many singers, although Philip, Eddie, Jody, and I auditioned many great vocalists, I could not believe some of the guys who walked through our door thinking they could replace Bobby DeBarge. Besides not having the look we needed, there were bass vocalists, operatic vocalists, vocalists who didn't sing but creaked out the words like an old door, and there were even vocalists who couldn't carry a tune in a forklift. Please note that I didn't call them singers, and after hearing them, I didn't call them back either. Over the years, I have learned that there is no replacing Bobby DeBarge, because to me, Bobby DeBarge was among the greatest talents God allowed to come down and visit this planet. Because Bobby DeBarge, as tortured and tormented a soul he was, he could bring a song to life from a gust of wind, from a flicker of light, from a smile, from a tear, and anything else within his grasp. And mostly because Bobby DeBarge was my friend, my brother, my child, and I loved him as God commanded me to. Hello, Tony. Hello, Trisha. Of the vocalists I continued to audition, there were two who impressed me enough to call back, and a guy by the name of Terrence Gaines, who was my first choice, ended up being the guy we hired. By stature, Terrence was a little shorter than the rest of us, but he was attractive and had a very pleasant personality, and most of all, he could really sing. From my opinion, his vocal sound and range was more like that of Blue Magic or like Harry Ray of the Moments, who later became Ray Goodman and Brown. But we liked him just the same, and in my mind, since our group had changed and our sound was evolving, the difference he brought would bring Switch closer to my original vision when Arnie was the co-lead vocalist opposite Philip. So, Terrence was it, and we signed him along with our friend and live guitarist Zane Giles. We groomed Terrence, taught him all of the lead and background parts of our hit songs, among other songs we performed. We also introduced him to and rehearsed him on new songs we plan to record for our next album. And after working so hard at rehearsal, teaching Terrence and Zane, getting ready for the studio, most of us found ways individually and collectively to play hard also. Now and then I would attend parties or go to clubs along with my non-switch friends. The LA party scene was always waiting for me, and on occasion I would pop up at upscale places like Osco's Disco, The Speakeasy, Carlos and Charlie's, where I'd run into and hang out with then peers like my brother Rick James or Jeffrey Daniel of the R&B group Shalimar, who had once again become a close friend after accidentally discovering we both moved to LA from Grand Rapids. Jeffrey and I had met years before after becoming close as co-stars of the Grand Rapids production of the play The Me Nobody Knows. Along with well-known, well-established stars in Hollywood, you were likely to run into or hang out with other fresh music and television stars, i.e. Stoney Jackson, who was a friend and my first management client a few years later. Kevin Hooks, Richard Dimples Fields, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Climax, actors T.K. Carter, Tina Andrews, Miguel Nunez, Reggie Dorsey, Ernest Thomas, Eddie Murphy, Eric Lanouville, it's French, that last name, Ron Glass, and a host of other young black Hollywood artists. So, there's a picture here with Miss Cynthia Horner. Who knows who Miss Cynthia Horner is? Come on, let's all tell our age. Put it in the chat. Who is Cynthia Horner? I don't know if she's still with us. Who was Cynthia Horner? Come on. Stoney Jackson, Todd Bridges, and Jeffrey Daniel. So, there's Stoney Jackson. Top was, I guess it's Greg, and then it's Stoney Jackson, and then Jeffrey Daniel, and then Cynthia Horner and Todd Bridges are hugged up together. I think Todd had to be about 16 in this picture. These were the folks, and that was a big part of my life during those days. Although the clubs were big fun, I was most comfortable at private parties, jazz clubs, and more intimate settings with small groups of personal friends. Yes, during the time I did big things and had big fun, as did most members of Switch, but beyond that, I spent the majority of my time making music and taking care of Switch business. Once again, it's time to get back in the studio to work on our 5th album for the Gordy label. Little did any of us know or assume at that time our days at MOTOWN were about to come to an end. With Bobby, Jody, and Jermaine no longer involved with Switch's music, the bulk of production for his album was thrust upon my shoulders. Philip, Eddie, Zane, and I wrote and arranged most of the songs for the album, and I inherited 3 other incomplete songs which Bobby had started for the Switch album but was unable to complete. No matter what state he was in, out of my respect for him and more so his creative rights. Oh Lord. Somebody's calling. It's somebody important that's calling, but I'm live on my phone. Well, I'll get back to him. I lost my place. Okay, no matter what state he was in, out of my respect for him and more so his creative rights, I initially refused to touch his work without him giving me the go-ahead. But due to his ongoing use of drugs, he had abandoned his work and was nowhere to be found. So, after being told by Lee Young Sr., Motown's then vice president of creative, that finished or not, I read it just how it's written. Let me go back. So, after being told by Lee Young Sr., Motown's then vice president of creative, that finished or not, the cost of these tracks will come out of Switch's current recording budget. I agreed to work to complete the tracks, add arrangements and vocals to turn in completed songs. Due to all of the changes in my life, including my now drug addiction, glad he was able to admit that. This time I went into the studio with the weight of the world on my shoulders. See, there was never a question of if I could produce this album by myself because this moment I had been grooming myself for since conceiving the group that would become known as Switch. But with all of the life and career changes I now had to endure and contend with, there was a question of whether I really wanted to take on all of this. But that question too diminished like a candle in the wind the day the first song was written. Soon after we began recording our final album for MOTOWN, I got a call from home. In the midst of catching me up on the goings on with my family, Mom tells me that my granddad's health had gone down so much that the family had to place him in a nursing home. Besides being physically sick, his mind is going from dementia, and he's forgotten many things than most people, she said. When that update was done, we talked about a few things before saying our goodbyes. After hanging up the phone, I decided I really needed to get there to see him before he slipped away altogether. So within a few days, I made the time and headed home on another one of my surprise visits. Once I got to Grand Rapids that evening, I picked up a rental car, made it to my mom's house, and remained there until the next day, enjoying mom's company, her cooking, and getting caught up on what had been going on with much of the Williams family. Early the next morning, I'm out making a few family rounds before visiting hours at the nursing home where my grandfather was. The scenery in Grand Rapids, per always, had not really changed since I first left home for Arizona and ultimately California to sign with Barry White and White Heat. The morning was cold and gray. The traffic was all but non-existent, and most of the streets were desolate. But I did see a few folk that I knew going here and there as I made my way to grandmother's home. Of course, she was excited and happy at my surprise visit. Per usual, I joined her, having a morning cup of coffee, and she and I talked for what seemed like hours. I so enjoyed exchanging ideas and personal history with my grandmother. The woman had always been wise and insightful, but for me in my dreams, she remained forever affirming and optimistic that all I had to do was try and I'd make it happen. So, for me to come home successful in the profession of my choosing and be able to share my stories and victories with one who believed in and supported me from the word go, this was the victory I reveled in and cherished above most. As our conversation began to wind down, I let her know that next on my agenda for the day was to see Granddad. She then changed gears and began to share what she knew about my grandfather's current mental and medical state. She let me know that his overall health was failing him, and because of the dementia, he was gradually slipping away, and he really wouldn't be with us much longer. She told me that it was good that I came home to check on all of them. I wanted to catch them before lunchtime, so I told her I'd better get going, to which she agreed was a good idea. I told her I'd be back either later on the next day, and I was on my way. I would later find that there was nothing she or anyone else could have said to really prepare me for what I would find. With most of my family living in close proximity, the nursing home too was close, and within 10 minutes, I had parked the car and was standing at the front desk signing the nursing home's guest list to see my grandfather. I recall that I couldn't stand still from the nervous tapping of my feet as the anxiousness consumed me. I was excited, I was worried, I was happy, and I was a little Greg all over again as I got closer to my primary reason for coming home. Upon making my way through the corridors and finally upon his room, I was taken aback at first sight of this man, my granddad, as he lay in his bed, looking up at his younger brother, my Uncle Ivory, told Jennings. The small but full-chested man I came looking for was no longer there. Instead, I saw a frail, much older man deep into dementia. My Uncle Toad was at his bedside when I arrived. I stood at the door listening to their verbal exchange as I fought to get my bearings before entering the room. Toad, we've got to get back home before Papa gets back, and I need your help. If you can come get them chickens, I'll get the pigs and we can make it back and won't get a whipping. Uncle Toad slowly bowed his head and wiped his eyes. Sure, you know Papa's been dead too many years and we don't live on that farm no more. We're in Michigan now. At that moment, Uncle Toad looked up, saw me standing in the doorway to Granddad's room. He quickly stood up and stretched out his arms to greet me with a hug. Boy, ain't you a sight for sore eyes? He asked as I got close to receive the big bear hug he planted on me. How are you, Uncle Toad? I asked just as he was saying, Shoo, here's your grandson, Greg, who done come all the way from California to see you. Toad, we got to get back home. Now, are you going to help me or not? I approached my grandfather, grabbed his hand as he had mine so many times in my life, and said, Hi, Granddad, I finally made it in. He looked up at me with this confused expression across his face, then turned to my uncle and asked, Toad, ain't this the man from the farm down the road? Uncle Toad looked at me sadly, then at my grandfather and replied, Sho, this your grandson, Greg. I know you remember him. He's Maddie's boy. He come up here from California to see about you. At first, my grandfather remained silent while looking me up and down. And then he chuckled a little, turning to Uncle Toad and said, Don't be playing with me. You know Papa's going to get us if we take much longer. My heart dropped as I struggled to accept the fact that my grandfather could no longer recognize me. The fact that my grandfather was gone, that he no longer had any idea who I was, hit me like a Mack truck. I was so dumbstruck and hurt. I began to gasp for breath and I stumbled to a chair resting against a nearby wall to break free of that moment. I tried to sit and pull myself together, but wound up stepping out of the room to lean up against the desk, a wall, or anything to support my legs, which seemed determined to collapse under me. I seriously fought to keep from crying out loud in front of staff and few guests moving about in the hallway. In short time, Uncle Toad emerged from the room and silently gestured for me to follow him to the outside patient area, where he pulled up 2 chairs and sat at a round picnic table. Boy, try not to feel bad. You don't really know nobody for long, but Maddie, he's slipping away a little more every day. Now don't let that stop you from coming by here to see him while you're here. I won't, Uncle Toad, but it's such a shock that he didn't know me. Yeah, Greg, I tell you, that's the way it is with everybody. One day he knows me, and the next minute he don't. But as much as he loves you, he just might know who you are next time you walk in the room. So keep trying long as you're here. Tell me, how is it out there in California? We all saw you on, what that boy name on the television? Mike Douglas, I asked. No, the other boy with the car commercial too. Oh, you mean Merv Griffin, the Merv Griffin show. Yeah, that's him. We all saw you and your group on that show. Now, boy, You done made it to the big time, huh? As he chuckled proudly. Everybody over there knows you, and we all proud of you, boy. Just remember to put God first, because only what you do for Christ gonna last. You know that, don't you? Yes, Uncle told. As long as Granddad, Mother, you, Aunt Mary, and everybody else been drilling that into our heads, yes, sir, I better know that. You sure got that right, he said with a hearty laugh. It was the moment which would set the tone for my all too brief stay in Grand Rapids this time. Yes, this particular visit was all about checking on and spending time with the elders in my family. As in my first visit with my grandfather, I was hit right between the eyes with the fact that any one of them might not be there next time I came through. As children, the Williams, Jennings, Edwards children were taught to respect their elders, honor thy mother and thy father, and we did. And on top of that, we loved them too. From the big to the small, from the young to the old, we learned and lived by that. Uncle Toad and I spent nearly an hour at that table, getting caught up on each other's lives. He fills me in on most of my cousins, his children's lives, especially my cousin David, who was in the patterns with me as best he could, and I shared with him aspects of my life that I knew would make him happy and proud. Hey Kelly, no, I didn't get the stainless steel cage for my parrots just yet. Um, Once we abruptly became aware of the time, we wrapped up the chat and made our way back into Granddad's room. He lay there fast asleep, so my uncle decided he would head home, and I decided to walk out with him and return later that day before it got too late. As we made it to his car, I hugged him and we said goodbye after I promised to drop by his house and see everyone before I headed back to California. I made it to my car and left the nursing home with my heart and spirit broken. I had just left the shell of the one man who had been the definitive example of what a man is throughout my life. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I knew my granddad to be a strong, caring, honorable man who may not have been the smartest man I encountered on my journey, but certainly the wisest and biggest contributor in me becoming the man I was constantly on my way to be. Yes, even the breathing. Yes, even though breathing, he was gone, never to return as the man I knew and loved. I went back to see Granddad twice more during my week at home, but both visits yielded the same result as the first. My grandfather was no longer there and would never make it back for any of us. And when the day came to catch my plane home, I boarded knowing this trip would probably be the last time I see my grandfather alive, and it was. He held on for a few months more, but died later in 1982. Due to my having no training when it came to money matters and saving, on top of my frequent drug use, I was living from paycheck to paycheck and didn't have the money to go to the funeral and nowhere to get it from. Still being under contract to MOTOWN, I reluctantly decided to go to the record company to request a small advance. At this time, the label was being run by Jay Lasker, who, behind his back, everyone, including some of Motown's top executives, was called Cockeyed Jr. because he was cross-eyed. The name was a reference of a Richard Pryor character in comedy routine. I had to keep myself from looking around the room when he spoke, wondering if he was talking to me or someone else because of his eyes, but when he pulled out the accounting book, he looked down. Greg, I see that the last Switch record isn't selling. But Mr. Lasker, the This Is My Dream album did well. I should have some producer royalties building up, and I'm not asking for much, just enough to go home to my grandfather's funeral. I'm sorry, but if I don't see sales in this book, they don't exist. I can't give you an advance. I tried a little harder to convince him that I was not the risk he was trying to make me out to be, by reminding him that since coming to Motown, I had always delivered, and including my contributions, Switch had sold millions of records and would continue to do so. But that fell on deaf ears, and my pride was not about to let me beg him or anyone else for anything. Pissed off, I walked out of his office trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. On every song I had written, arranged, and produced since I signed with Motown, my projects were always submitted ahead of schedule and under budget, not like most recordings done by some producers at Motown who spent excessive amounts of money on one song which was rarely completed and turned in by its due date. I also had just learned that producers, whether signed to a Motown producer contract or not, were paid a per song producer fee, which my so-called managers failed to tell me or request on my behalf because when it came down to it, they worked for Motown and really didn't work for me at all. On my way from Lasker's, I walked past Bob Jones' office, who usually had his door closed, but this time it was open and I didn't look up to even know he was in there. Bob saw me walk by, got up, came to the door, and called out to me. "You just gonna walk on by, Mr. Williams?" he asked in a gruff voice. Slightly stunned, I looked back, trying to smile and respond. "Hey, Bob, how are you?" I asked. "If you bring your ass on in here, I can tell you," he said in a low, joking tone. I followed Bob into his office and took a seat. Trying to be upbeat, we began to get caught up on how things were going. Bob, of course, filled me in on what was being said about Switch's professional and non-professional behavior. Then he said, "Word is, you finally solved one of your problems." Bobby finally left the group. "Now, Bob," I began, but he quickly cut me off saying, I know, you don't have to tell me you guys wanted him out as much as he wanted to leave." I chimed in, "Bob, if no one else knew, you know I've been trying to have the cancer cut out for a little more than a year now. But the powers that be around here, well, he's so strung out on that shit that they don't know if they're ever gonna get a record out of him anyway. But at least he doesn't get to drag you guys down any further. You know, it just makes me sad. Now, I feel for him, but more so you because I know how hard it is to love somebody and not be able to get through to them. Anyway, what are you doing up here?" I really didn't want to tell him that I had just been turned down for an advance, the only advance that I have ever asked for since signing with Motown. But this was Bob, and he knew each of us well. He really cared about Switch, especially Bobby. Under Bob's gruff, standoffish exterior was really a sweet, caring person, but most folk were not allowed close enough to know this about him. Well, I ended up letting Bob in on my dilemma, to which without a word he opened his desk, pulled out his personal checkbook, began to write, and then asked, "How much do you need?" Caught off guard by his immediate action, I stumbled for words while sincerely trying to refuse his offer. But again, he cut me off saying, "Don't back up now. You need it and I've got it. So just tell me how much and I can finish this check and put this damn book away." And even though I knew that I could and would pay Bob back for my next bi-weekly pay and that he was doing this out of a real love for me in my forever need of being self-reliant, I usually don't ask or take money or gifts from others, including family members, and I am therefore unintentionally awkward and not too gracious when accepting the kindness of others. That was another one of those long ass sentences. But in this situation, as he said, I really did need it, and he was offering, in fact, insisting that I take it. So I accepted this act of pure consideration and kindness and took the money to go home. Granddad's death added to the haze which surrounded me. During this period, financial instability, emotional upheaval, career uncertainty, accompanied by a growing drug addiction, was consuming me as I tried optimistically to stay in control and keep things moving. As it stood, the world, especially my immediate world, was counting on me to continue to assure them that all in life was well, even though in reality it was falling apart a little at a time. I had to keep things tight here in LA, but I really needed to get to Grand Rapids to say goodbye to someone that I loved, admired, and respected with all of my heart throughout my life. So, within the next few days, Art, Ruby, and I flew back to LA together. Once there, we too were swept up by the goings on with family and friends, which included the good, bad, and sad emotionalism of the occasion. All right, final chapter, chapter 17. It's titled Leaving Motown. And there's a nice picture of Greg Williams out of Right On magazine. Nobody could tell me who Cynthia Horner was or is. Well, I think she was the editor of Right On magazine. Once back from my adventure in Michigan, Switch continued to evolve, as did our relationship with Motown. I learned more valuable information about Motown at that time, all too late to do a damn thing to keep the snowball from turning into an avalanche. By now, Shelley Berger's short-term involvement with Switch was over, and I had enlisted possible management with Joe Jackson and even Tony Jones as Motown was tossing Switch around like used-up hose. Bobby was gone and Switch had a gig in San Diego. Everyone was ready to go, but we couldn't find Tommy. Now bear in mind that Tommy had made all of the rehearsals, so we had no indication that he wasn't going to show up. So I held the bus and went to 3 dope houses where I knew Tommy bought his bass. Each house I went to, I was told that Tommy wasn't there, so I had no choice but to leave it alone. Fortunately, on short notice, we were fortunate enough to find and hire a friend, Mike McKinney, who played bass for the Jacksons. Mike learned the entire show and songs on the bus as we drove to San Diego. This was also the show where we introduced Terrence Gaines to the stage. Terrence, having never performed before this many people before, roughly 10,000, froze up and could not remember when he was supposed to sing lead. And when he was supposed to sing background, he forgot the limited dance routines. The brother was altogether lost. Now my keyboards are positioned front stage left. Eddie is positioned front stage right, with Philip and Terrence both singing center stage. We began to play Love Me over and over, and Philip and Terrence took the microphones from the stands and began to sing the song. As the song gets to the chorus, I hear Philip sing his lead as Zane and I sing the background, but I notice Terrence's voice is missing. Just as I raised my head to look up, he had danced his way to my immediate right, so close I was startled, and he bends over to me and says, "Hey Greg, I'm fucking up, ain't I?" If it hadn't been such a serious moment, I would have laughed my ass off. But my show was falling apart because this brother got stage fright in the middle of a song at that. I looked at him angrily and tried not to give the audience a clue as to what was going on, and I said, "Do your show, man. Do your show." He danced his way back to center stage, still not knowing how or where to pick up, yet he continues. Now I'm dealing with a new bass player who really wound up doing a great job and a singer who was not a performer. And I have to find this out not in rehearsals, but on stage in front of 10,000 people. Needless to say, everyone else on stage caught on to Terrence's dilemma and tried to cover for his inability to pull it together. As the show ended, I saw Terrence leave the stage, but to this day, I haven't seen him since. I spoke to him by phone 24 years later in 2005 and again in 2017, but still I haven't seen him. Not backstage, not in the dressing room, not at the hotel, nowhere. I would have taught him how not to be afraid. Switch would have taught him how to hold his own during a performance. We believed in him. Hell, that's why we hired him. But he never gave me the opportunity to help him live his dream. I was sad about that. I was sad about Tommy and even missed Bobby, although I knew our finally going in separate directions was for the best. I knew then that the journey downhill had begun and that recording for MOTOWN would soon be a memory. Returning to LA after the gig, a friend from Grand Rapids, James Long, whose house I had gone to looking for Tommy and was told that Tommy was not there, called me and said Tommy had been in his house all of the time I was there looking for him. He was hiding under the bed. I was hurt. I was hurt because as close as I thought we'd been for all of these years, he didn't have the decency to tell me he was leaving the band. Tommy, with his misguided sense of loyalty, was leaving to follow Bobby, who was going nowhere fast. Everyone but Tommy could see that Bobby had no real loyalty to Tommy, or anyone else for that matter, because in his present state of mind, he was incapable of being loyal to himself. But just the same, Tommy left Switch and waited for Bobby. Once his recording budget became available, Bobby recruited Tommy to play bass on his tracks and be a part of his band, but he never got his shit together, and his promises to Tommy never came through. So later, after leaving Switch, Billy Preston helped Tommy by taking him on tour with him to Australia, and after that brief tour ended, that was it for Tommy. With nowhere else to go and no way to feed his wife and children, Tommy packed up his belongings and his family and headed back to Grand Rapids. As our time and even some of our personal relationships at MOTOWN continued to dwindle, the remaining Switch members tried to remain creative. Me, Philip, Jody, Eddie, Zane, and our newest member, Terrence Gaines, put forth our best efforts to move on past the ghost of Bobby and Tommy DeBarge quickly. We wrote and arranged new material and diligently drove right back into the studio. While getting it in with positive progress, we were called by MOTOWN to schedule another of our post-DeBarge A&R meetings with then Vice President of Creative Lee Young Sr., who was younger brother to jazz great Lester Young and father to MOTOWN's chief attorney and then Vice President of Legal Lee Young Jr. Because Lee Sr. was a noted musician himself and was Nat King Cole's drummer for many years, Lee understood the creative process, concerns, and issues better than anyone who sat in his seat throughout our entire 5 years at Motown. Being faced with Bobby's and now Jermaine's absence, writing, producing, and working side by side with the rest of Switch, the bulk of this album's productions fell into my lap, which I had to accept and embrace like no time or role before. Still, from time to time, individually and collectively, we had and welcomed infrequent update meetings with Lee. Within a few months into Switch 5, Suzanne passed, who was with the Jackson 5, stepped into Lee's job and role. Motown Legal sent then A&R director Simone Sheffield to the session with an addendum to our existing contract, which still had Switch bound for another 3 years. The addendum to re-sign with the same money but without a signing bonus, and after serious discussions with Jody, Philip, Eddie, and I, we agreed to decline Motown's bullshit offer and look elsewhere for a deal. You signed as an artist, a songwriter, and producer. However, your advance monies in Switch, DEBARGE, and various other Motown artists' cases was our bi-weekly salary. The studio time to record your music, the musicians' payments, the producers being paid, as well as unrelated promotional expenses, i.e., internal and external promotional and publicity costs, equipment, stage props, and costumes, and other applicable expenses related to artists' career, which are advanced and or paid by a record company on artists' behalf, has to be covered and recouped before you get a dime. Therefore, you can and often will always be in debt because even the money you are supposed to be paid for records sold goes to cover all monies provided and or spent on your behalf. So in the final analysis, you have nothing. Artists make bulk of their money from going on the road. After meeting and discussing this with the remaining members of Switch, I let Motown know that we would pass on their offer and we would be leaving upon completion of the album. Philip left the band in 1983. He said that his brother James had set up meetings for him and Zane with Ed Eckstein, who was the head of Quincy Jones's new label, Quest Records. I asked Philip, well, what about Switch? Might there be some interest for us over there? He was quick to respond, Quincy don't deal with cats who do drugs. I remember becoming real quiet. I was first shocked to feel that Philip, Zane, and James had conspired to make this move and kept me in the dark, confirming again that there really is no loyalty in the music business. Just me and my antiquated ideas that do unto others as you would have them do unto you still meant something in the hearts and minds of a chosen few, especially people who I had handpicked to take this journey with me. Reacting through my own guilt and paranoia and knowing that not to be true, I took it personal. But instead of arguing and or fighting, which I really felt like doing, I just dropped the subject altogether and moved on. I was left further in the midst of my fog. Now Switch was over, and all was left was my going through the motions. See, in retrospect, I knew the second I accepted Bobby into my band, it would not last long because I knew that either he would have to leave or be thrown out because he had problems that nothing and no one could resolve. But I didn't consider the possibility that Tommy would leave me. I had no idea that one day Philip would leave me. But once those three members were gone, Switch was finally gone. In my heart, I knew that I had left switch at Motown. As I moved on to what would be a total experience, the final reality was so far from where my band began, there was no resemblance of my initial dream, with shattered memories of Switch, DeBarge, Motown, and me. Well, that's the end, y'all. That's the end. Hmm. Um, I'll just read this real quick. It's titled About the Author. It says Gregory Williams is the founder / leader of the late 70s Motown Records multi-platinum selling artist Switch and the author of his first published book, Switch, DeBarge, Motown, and Me. A play-by-ear musician, singer, arranger, producer, Gregory's 50-plus years journey through life, love, and the entertainment industry is the backdrop for this insightful, factual telling of his How I Did It autobiography. Gregory has an associate's degree in English and better than equivalents of a master's degree in making magic through music and entertainment. Over the years, he has won various accolades and awards as a performer, including Gold and Platinum Album Awards as artist, songwriter, producer for Switch and Switch 2, Gold Album Awards for the Best of Switch, a multi-platinum album awards, more than 50 million records sold to date, as a producer on Boys to Men. Gregory is a winner of ASCAP's Top 100 R&B Songwriters for the years of 1979 and 1980, and winner of 2 ASCAP Rhythm and Soul Music Awards for Top Hip Hop / Rap Writers and Top Music Publisher for 2007. Gregory currently makes his home in the Los Angeles area, while he continues to perform with Switch and remains active as a recording artist, musician, and record producer. According to Gregory, music and entertainment have always been my life. From his beginning as a solo vocalist in his kindergarten Christmas play and being the trumpet blowing leader of his first band at age 7, to a not too short stint in acting, singing, and playing through his teens, and even through his successful years as the founder / leader of former Motown recording group Switch, Gregory stays on task and continues to live each day as if it's his last by asking, what else can I do? On top of all of that, Gregory loves to make folks laugh, is a serious cook, and is known from coast to coast for his incredible homemade popcorn. All right, that's all there is to read. That was it. That's the end. Finito of Switch, DeBarge, Motown, and Me. That's it. That's how it ended. Wow. Good book, huh? Mm. So what y'all think? So out of this book, Tommy's book, and Bunny's book, which was the best? Well, Bunny's books. I read 2 of her volumes. Which was the best? I say, hands down, Tommy DeBarge. Yeah. Tommy, his book was just so raw and honest. And you know he was very honest in that book because there's just a lot of stuff that he told that I believe most people wouldn't have told. You say, Bunny? You know, Tommy got on my nerves in that book with his drug addiction, man. I was so worn out as if I was really living with him during those days. And then Bunny's book used to take me through it too, with just Bunny's book took me through it too. There was at one point where I was trying to get back to read it, but I just didn't want to pick it up because, you know, the denial of her mother and, you know, just sickening stuff, you know, just sickening stuff. But if you listen to DEBARGE, none of that stuff that Bobby and Bunny talking about ever happened. And I'm like, will people understand that every child in the family has a different childhood, especially when there's 10 kids and you have like sets of kids? Like the first 4 kind of grew up together and then others came along, and the first set is too old to really be hanging out with the new set, you know. So it's a different childhood. And then by the time the last set came along, you know, there was a new man in the house. He might have been abusive too, but nothing on the level as Daddy DeBarge. That's a whole different childhood than the first set of kids. So if you wasn't even born yet, Elle, you can't speak on nothing that happened or didn't happen. You was still in your daddy's nutsack. So what you know? Nothing. So shut up and let folks tell their story. I wouldn't say Elle is lying. I'd just say Elle is in denial. Sometimes denial looks like lying. But he's just in denial. And I mean, if you think about it, us reading and hearing it through a book, you know, their stories, it's hard to digest. So I can imagine how hard it is to digest when you're an actual family member. It's just undigestible for Elle. That's all. That's all. I mean, unless you're LaToya Jackson, you just ain't gonna make up nasty shit about your family and tell it to the world. But hey, that's just my opinion. Hey James, how you doing? James, I wonder if it was you. I think it was V-Dub though. Somebody had this video of this little skinny dude that used to be in our sector back in the day, like 2011, 12, 13. He was skinny. He always wore a baseball hat or something. And he was an angry little dude. And he was always complaining about women and how girls don't like him and how girls treat him. I need to see that video again because I want to do a video about incels. What is an incel? An incel is a male who is involuntarily celibate. And this dude, I can't remember his name, but he looked like he was short and he was skinny, but he was so angry at women. He would get on and make a video how I'll paraphrase. This girl gave me her number, and when I called it, it wasn't the right number. Why did you give me the wrong number? You didn't have to do that. Man, y'all got to see this video for yourself. Kent. Oh, you remember. Do you have any of those videos? Can you play it, please? Anybody who's listening, is James Gordon in the chat? Please go and subscribe to him because he puts up some good videos. If you have any of Kent's videos, if you got all of them, as much as you have, please play them all. Because, back then when I watched his videos, I never heard of the term incel. And I just couldn't understand why he was such an angry little dude. And then the other day it clicked on me. I was like, that dude, that is an incel. He was so angry that he didn't have a girlfriend. Y'all have to see this level of anger he displayed in his videos. Y'all have to see this. Kent, just search Kent. Okay. He said some of his stuff is still on here. Search his name. I wonder whatever happened to that little dude. He did get a girl. Well, thank God, because he was liable to go out there and shoot up people. Commit mass murder. Glad he got a girl. Glad he got some. Somebody need to give that brother some, because he was losing it. Thank God. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. That boy done got him some coochie. And praise God for that girl, because she saved a lot of lives. She prevented a lot of heartbreak, a lot of money spent out for funerals. And she saved that boy's life from maybe suicide or spending the rest of his life in prison. Whoever that girl is a saint. Thank you. Whew. Anyway, y'all search Kent. He's a black dude. He's little. He always got on a baseball cap. Angry. Oh, he was so angry. I never seen nothing like it. And then he would get this stare in the camera that would creep you the fuck out. Like, yo, this dude is off his fucking rocker. If you see him going into the supermarket, you better turn around. Don't be no place, no public area with a crowd of people and you see that nigga show up. All right. I gotta go. But, yeah, I think I'm gonna go in the media room and just come back with the video, flipping through this book and showing you the pictures. I'll be back in a few. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like to send Madam Whipass a donation, it's Madam Whipass on the $, Cash App. $, MADAM WHIPASS. Madam Whipass. One word. All right? Thank you, and you're very welcome. And I'll be back in a few. Peace.